As someone who is not on the autistic spectrum, I was very interested to see how someone who is on the autistic spectrum views themselves through media. Now that I think that this is a really important subject because it's not one that we think of often, but there are a lot of people who are part of that community and who do suffer misrepresentation. So here you're about to hear me sit down with a good friend of mine named Alex, and we discuss how she views herself. So I'm here with Alex. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Alex. I'm a student at Humberside, and I am on the autism spectrum.
And today I'm going to be asking her some questions about the representation of youth who are on the autistic spectrum in media. So the first question is, do you think that there is sufficient representation?
No.
No? Why is that?
Well, they're just not... There isn't many characters in any shows, really, ever. And when there are, they're often misrepresented, represented poorly, or only show a very small part of the spectrum.
So we were talking earlier specifically about Sheldon. Why do you think that Sheldon's character is not the most ethical representation of someone on the spectrum?
I think since you said the actor himself is on the spectrum, he probably portrays it accurately, his character, except the way that they treat the character, like all of his quirks, all the little things are something to laugh at, to make fun of him for.
So I'm just going to interrupt the podcast quickly. I'm going to play a clip from The Big Bang Theory, and it's of Sheldon having or representing one of these quirks that Alex mentions, and you'll hear that the audience finds it quite amusing, and it's meant to be amusing, even though he's just doing something that he thinks is standard.
Penny. What's up, Buttercup?
Alrighty, back to the podcast.
So that's something that's common when you see autistic people in media, is that they're considered weird and their autism is a joke.
Yeah, and it's used as a way to, well, almost get money, right? Because they're using it to be funny.
Like in Rain Man.
What happens in
Rain Man? One of the characters is autistic, and he's pretty much just used as like a quirky, like just as what makes the movie.
Yeah.
In like special. That they have an autistic character who can count things really fast or something.
Yeah. And do you think that representation affects people who are on the spectrum in real life?
Yeah. So media likes to portray autistic people as weird, which of course affects young autistic people's self-esteem when everything, like all the symptoms of autism are associated with being weird. And they're odd, and they're unusual, and atypical. Yeah,
which is another thing that we were talking about was the show Atypical, which I personally enjoy the show. I, however, am not on the spectrum.
You're allowed to like it.
Yeah, I know I'm allowed to like it. And I was able to learn a little bit from the character. There was a quote that we were talking about earlier about like how he realizes, the main character realizes that people are laughing at him and he doesn't know why, but he knows that they're laughing at him.
Yeah, it's a problem. People think that often autistic people are not all there, is another quote from the
Yeah, not all there, and he's all there. Like
that autistic people don't really know what's happening. When you talk about them, they don't understand what you're saying. And so like that's what something that Atypical does do, right? Where they show his perspective, but also just calling it the show Atypical is kind of a bad idea.
I'm going to pause the podcast again. We're laughing here because the word atypical means unusual or abnormal, which is to say that people on the spectrum are unusual or abnormal, which is not the message that Alex believes should be portrayed. All right, back to the podcast. Do you think that it helps people who are not on the spectrum understand it? Like atypical specifically because I do believe that there's writing staff who, I hope that there are writing staff who are on the spectrum. Do you think that it helps people who are not on the spectrum to understand it a bit better?
I don't think all representation is good representation.
Okay.
Like when you show the character being weird, rather than just being a normal person who has autism.
Yeah.
So I think Atypical makes an effort to show this person is, a human being who has autism and showing the different aspects of their life. But a lot of the shows, they just go the easy route of just saying they're weird. We're just going to make every weird thing and just go, haha, how funny is that?
Yeah. And by the third season, I know you haven't watched it, but by the third season, they don't really talk about it anymore. It's just that's part of his character. Like, he has a completely different storyline. It's just him getting used to college, which is a very normal storyline.
Yeah.
But it does focus a lot on that for the first 2 seasons because it's about that. It is called Atypical, which, like you said, is a poor choice.
I saw the trailer where he's talking about how only 9% of autistic people or something graduate.
Oh, yeah, that's the first episode. That's true.
I'm not sure that statistic is accurate, but it could be,
Well, if you think... Oh, wait, it was 4 out of 5 don't graduate.
Within the first 4 years?
Yeah, but that's not a big deal. Like, well, no, that's not fair to say at all. But, I mean, if it takes someone more than 4 years to graduate, then it takes them more than 4 years to graduate.
I think one of the reasons for that is because there isn't sufficient, like, tools for autistic people to use to, like, pass, like... A lot of autistic people have anxiety and depression. It's a very common, but you can't treat it the way you would treat a neurotypical person because you can't do cognitive training or whatever you call that because it's not something you can change. You just have to learn how to change your environment or how you think about these things.
And how do you think that media can do a better job of representing people on the spectrum?
Well, of course, don't show them as being weird outcasts who don't understand what real society is. And then, let me think a bit.
Yeah, I can edit the sentences.
And then also, maybe show, like, another problem is they show it as an illness.
Yeah.
But you can never cure it. You can just make living with it easier.
Yeah.
And so a lot of shows don't bother showing that there are ways
to make it easier.
Live in a life as an autistic person and not.
So do you believe that it should still be something that's mentioned? So if there's a character that's autistic, whether you don't mention it right off the bat, right? Like, that's just who they are. And then within, let's say it's a movie, 30 minutes into the movie, they mention it. And then they just, so it's just like a bit.
Well, it is a part of their character. And you will see the world differently. So maybe to allow people to understand why it is they're doing something a certain way, you'd mention it is because they're on the spectrum. And that's why this character acts the way they do.
But then...
So you're not confused.
But don't make their character an autistic person.
Yeah, that's not their only quality.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Yeah.